Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. This is the Gratitude and Granting Workshop at Missional Voices. If you are meaning to be somewhere else, Caitlin will help you because I don't know where you're supposed to be. And if you are meant to be here, thank you and welcome. My name is Heather Melton. I am the Presiding Bishop's Staff Officer for the United Thank Offering. On behalf of the Presiding Bishop and the United Thank Offering Board that I work with and the UTO staff, Caitlin and Kayla Massey, who's not here with us this weekend, I bring you greetings and our gratitude for your interest in our work and for inviting us to be on the journey with you all, and gratitude to Missional Voices for the ways they've invited us to be on the journey with them. So I want to start this morning. I really want to not talk the whole time, which is challenging for me because I'm half Irish. But I want to talk a little bit about what UTO does, and then I want to kind of open it up. I'm going to give some basic information about how granting works. The Missional Voices people asked me to talk about general things with granting in addition to UTO, and then really open it up for questions that you all might have. So help me stay on track with that. So let me start by telling you a little bit about UTO and what I do. The United Thank Offering began in the late 1800s among a group of women. At the time in the Episcopal Church, there was an organization called the Women's Auxiliary to the Episcopal Church. And the women of the church were doing what was called a box ministry. They'd pack up boxes of stuff to send out to the missionaries on the frontier. And then the missionaries would send back letters saying, we need more prayer books, or we need this, or we need that. And they'd pack up those things that they needed, and then they also pack things, this is the part that I always find really precious and lovely, they'd pack things that they thought the women and the children of the missionaries would want. So fashion magazines and sewing materials and those sorts of things. And they were doing this, and they received a letter back from a priest in Anvik, Alaska. If you watch the Iditarod, you know Anvik, Alaska, because the Iditarod goes through Anvik. And the priest said, as I like to translate 1800s language, ladies, thanks so much for the prayer books. I don't have a church building. But, hugs and kisses, priest on the frontier. And the ladies were like, well, that's a problem. And there had been some communication among the women of the church about women who felt called to be missionaries, and the Episcopal Church was not sending women missionaries. So they took up a thank offering. They said, everybody stop, think about what you're thankful for. We're going to pass the plate. And you put your money in the plate, and we're going to send it off. They raised enough money to build a church in Anvik, Alaska, which stands today. And literally the Iditarod runs right in front of Christ Church, Anvik. And they sent Lisa Lovell to be the first female missionary of the Episcopal Church to Japan, where she was a teacher and a nurse. This was powerful for these women. And so in 1889, they formalized their work as a thank offering. And the thank offering became the United Thank Offering. And every year, the women of the church, until the 70s, amongst themselves, raised, collected, and distributed the money, and used some of that money to run the ministry of UTO. In the 70s, with the ordination of women and changes in the church, the United Thank Offering became a ministry of the whole church. Women, men, children, everyone. And the women of the church, to ensure that thankfulness would continue, created a trust fund. And so now 100% of what is given to UTO is given away the following year. Every penny that's given as a thank offering is given away. We do the same thing they did from the very beginning of time. We ask every Episcopalian to adopt a spiritual discipline of gratitude, to notice the good things that God is doing in their life, make a thank offering, and those offerings become a blessing to bless others. The way I describe it is to tell a story from my own life about how this sort of secular thinking of UTO works. So when I started working for UTO, the story I used to tell is the story I still tell about what does gratitude mean. So for me, it begins with a story from Vincent Donovan, who wrote a book called Christianity Rediscovered. He was a missionary, a Roman Catholic missionary in Africa, who was a failure at being a missionary, which makes him fantastic at it. And shortly before he died, he had come home to live with his sister. And they were washing dishes, and he said to his sister, have you ever heard my Thanksgiving sermon? And she said, No, Vince, we've never been together at Thanksgiving. You just came home from the mission field. And she said in her postscript to his book that he became quiet. And he said, the Thanksgiving sermon I always write is this: when we say thank you, what we are saying is my love to your love. Because when someone does a kindness for us, it's hard to repay it. We cannot match kindness for kindness. So when we are saying thank you, we're acknowledging the love that you gave to me in that gesture of kindness. Thank you is saying my love to your love. The next day, Vincent Donovan died while he was out for a walk. The day after that was Mother's Day, and a bouquet of flowers arrived at the house. He had been out walking to the florist shop to order flowers for his sister. And she got them on Mother's Day and opened the card, and it said, my love to your love. Thank you. We cannot respond to the gifts that God gives us in the way that God gives them. The abundance of those gifts can only be matched with the gratitude of saying, my love to your love. UTO is trying to teach us to be grateful in a time and in a world that wants us to believe that we are entitled to the good things that come to us, when in reality, we know that we are entitled to nothing. UTO is a reminder that the blessings we get are blessings for others. It's the most important work I think we do as a church. When the presiding bishop was talking about selfishness and that love is the response to selfishness, he's right. And the way we can push back against the selfishness of our society is with gratitude. Love expressed through our gratefulness for what's happening in the world. So, this idea of blessings becoming blessings for others. I am the proud mother of 3.5-year-old twins. They are my whole universe of gratitude. When the girls were born, they were born a month early. We were in the NICU, which is a terrifying experience with basically healthy babies, more terrifying for other people who were there. And I asked people to pray for us while we were in the NICU and to make thank offerings for every day we made it. Those thank offerings became a grant to the Episcopal Church in Navajo Land, along with some other people's money. It was a $97,000 grant to the Episcopal Church in Navajo Land. So not just our thankfulness united with others. That grant became a grant to the Episcopal Church in Navajo Land to build a blue corn farm. One of the problems among the Navajo is unemployment. Unemployment among the Navajo is at about 44%. Nationally, it's 4.3%. And diabetes is a huge issue. Blue corn is a traditional Navajo food product that has struggled in modern days, and so at St. Christopher's in Bluff, Utah, they wanted to put in a blue corn farm, teach people to grow blue corn, create a milling station, and sell it to make jobs and feed people. That grant was thriving. That same year as my children were one of my kids developed this weird eczema. And the doctor said she'll grow out of it. But you know how moms are? It's like, no, I must find the solution to the eczema. So we made a grant to a Thistle Farms affiliate that year, and between the unscented balm from Thistle Farms and soap that Good Shepherd Mission in Fort Defiance, Arizona started making with blue corn from the Blue Corn Project, that soap and balm cured my child's eczema that the doctor couldn't believe was healed. Our blessings become blessings for others. And so I gave another thank offering, and it became another grant. And it all starts to wrap us all together, one to another. The blessings of my small people and my small thank offerings become blessings that ripple out into the whole world. Because we need each other. Our blessings become a sign of our love to the church. So that's what UTO does. That's what we invite Episcopalians to be a part of. To recognize that God is in the midst of us, that God is working in spite of us at times to bring about the beautiful dream that God has for us, and that we get to be a part of it through our love and gratitude, and that it will go on to bless others. People say to me, as a parish priest, people will often say to me, What can I do to help when anything happens? Anytime anything bad happens, right? Well, what can I do? And I always say to them, get your blue box and give thanks, because we use these little UTO blue boxes. There's a bunch downstairs. Take them home with you. When you feel like there's nothing you can do, you can give thanks. And know that when you put that coin in the box, UTO is going to take it and hand it to somebody so they can respond to the problem. We rebuild. We don't do disaster relief. We won't come in and fix your church because a hurricane took it away. We'll come in and fix your church because the hurricane took it away, and because of that, God called you to realize that your community needed a center for senior citizens to come together to work with teenagers in after-school programs to be less afraid. And we did that through St. Paul's in New Orleans, Louisiana. Our blessings become blessings for others. I am grateful that a hurricane has never taken my house away. And I am grateful that through UTO I was able to help people whose homes were. Our blessings become blessings for others. But for you all, in your context, here's the important thing to know about UTO. So back in the day when the ladies were together, they made a decision that was really important, and I think the best decision a group of Episcopalians have probably ever made. And the decision they made was this: they would only fund innovative ministries. When the church caught up to what UTO was funding, they would go and fund something else. And they also made the decision that because they were funding innovative ministries, that success was not measured by your deliverables, but by your showing up in your community. And that's what we still do today. You can look at the history of these grants from 1883 to today. We have a whole list. If you want to see every grant that's ever been given by UTO, you can go to our webpage and see all of them, or I can email it to you. And what's amazing is you can watch the church catch up, right? So UTO sends female missionaries. The church starts to send female missionaries. UTO stops. Then you can see it happen through all sorts of phases of life. So why UTO and Missional Voices make really good friends is because as you all are having the conversation about what's next, UTO wants to have the conversation about how to help you get to what's next. So each year, the United Thank Offering does our grant system. We have 2 cycles. We do a fall cycle for young adults and seminarians, and we do a spring cycle that we just call our annual grants. They're the ones we've been doing forever and ever and ever. The young adult and seminarian grant applications come out the first Friday of August and are due the first Friday of November. The annual grants come out the first Friday of December and are due the first Friday of March.
So we missed it.
You just missed it. I know, right? Timing's everything in the church. But now you have a whole set of months to think about things. Every year the focus changes. The criteria basically stays the same, but the focus changes. Let me tell you what's unique about UTO funding and the regular grant session, because the two are very different, but I'm going to mostly focus on the regular grants. Here's what makes UTO unique. The first is we do not tell you what you need. We expect you to tell us, and we expect you to be honest. The number one thing they tell you when you take classes on how to write grants is to pad your budget. Do not pad your budget for UTO. We want to all be good Christian fellowship, and the board believes that you are asking for what you need to be successful with your work. So if you ask us for $50,000 and the board feels that that is within the focus and within their work and their scope and is based on a rubric of lots of things, eligible for funding, they will give you $50,000. We will not cut your budget. We'll only cut your budget if you ask for something we cannot fund by the audit standards. So that's pretty unique. The other thing is we don't tell you how much to ask for. Now, I will say the average UTO grant size is between $35,000 and $40,000. We do provide you with those scales so you can see. We have funded $1,500, and we have funded $107,000 to build a NICU in Jerusalem for Palestinian and Israeli families to come for free, and a blue corn farm for $97,000. So it's all over the board what we fund. We fund what you need based on the focus, the innovation, and the community's desire to partner with you. And God's calling you into that mission together. So it's pretty open. And here's the other thing. The UTO board, in their wisdom, I think one of the greatest things they did was they got frustrated at one point because they noticed lots of professional grant writers were writing UTO grants. And so, yeah, which was great if you can afford one. So what we do is we will help you. And by we, they mean me. I will help you. I don't have any say in your grants. The best part of my job is I don't pick who gets funded. So that means when someone's like, I didn't get funded, I'm like, yeah, that's the worst, because I didn't have anything to do with it. But I will help you. So once that application goes out on the first Friday of either August or December, you can pick up the phone or email me, and I will help you. I will review your application with you. I will walk you through it. I will do as much hand-holding as I possibly can until the Friday before the deadline, and then you're on your own. I will make sure that you have done the best that you can. My goal is that the only reason you would be told no from UTO is because we didn't have enough money, not because you didn't have a good enough application, or it wasn't complete, or you didn't understand. We offer webinars. We offer you as much help as we can so that you can be successful. And then we go out and we try to talk about UTO because we need your help. Because every year we get about 3 times the request of what we have funding for. This year we're giving away about $1.3 million. And we had almost $3 million of requests. So if every Episcopalian gave a penny a day, we could fund all of our requests and more. So please encourage people to give to UTO. It's really important because I will tell you the things we don't fund are heartbreaking. But the things we do fund are amazing. And they all deserve it. Because God is doing something new in this church, out on the edges. And it's really, really exciting stuff. And the other thing I'll tell you that I think is really interesting about UTO is we don't tell you how to do your business. That's not our job. There are granting agencies that will say, we want you to do it this way or that way. We don't do that. Through Missional Voices, we're starting a new thing to help connect our grant sites with folks like you so that you can share your stories with each other and help each other, because people are out on the road doing these things. We're all on a different place in the path, and we can help each other, and it's not so lonely when we do it together. So we are trying to connect people to strengthen the work that you're doing, but there is no, UTO will not show up 5 years after a grant and say, how's that going? There is no gotcha moment of UTO. We really want you to try something new. We will not fund existing programs. We will not fund your budget. We will fund staff. We will fund new staff people, expanded staff people. We will fund renovations if the renovation is to allow you to do something new that you couldn't do otherwise. So it's all those sorts of things, but it always is rooted in this idea of you are trying something new that you can't do because your budget won't let you. That is always the baseline rubric of UTO. I'm doing really well on time. I'm very impressed with myself. So I'm going to stop. I'm actually kind of where I thought I should be and answer some questions that you might have. Oh, sorry, I was supposed to talk about grants in general. So let me say that, and then I'll answer questions. So the Episcopal Church does have grant funding other than UTO. UTO, I think, I could be wrong, is one of the larger pots of grant money for Episcopal churches, dioceses, provinces, and Episcopal entities. Because if you are a separate 501c3 that is affiliated through your diocese and your church, and we can talk about what that actually means, because it means something different everywhere, you are eligible for UTO funding. There's also funding through Jubilee ministries. You have to be a designated Jubilee site, but Jubilee does have small grants for their Jubilee ministries. There's funding through what's called Roan Ridge, the Roan Ridge Trust. That grant cycle has also just closed and is about to be announced, I believe. Roan Ridge is for rural and small churches. Specifically, there is the Constable Fund, which also has some funding. There are some evangelism grants and church planting grants, and creation care grants. Those are my favorites. I don't know why I was about to forget those. We are working on moving towards sort of a universal granting schedule to help people better access Episcopal Church granting and find your way through navigating all of that, which I know can be challenging. And just because you apply for one does not mean you can't apply for another. Because some things UTO will fund and some things we won't, and Roan Ridge might fund what we won't fund, so be creative. And that's it about the other grants. Oh, so with granting, let me give you my real quick and dirty advice about writing grants. It's the same advice I give to seminarians about to take the general ordination exams. Answer the question that is asked, not the question you wanted to be asked. Then once you've answered the questions, delete the questions, hand it to someone, and ask them to have them write in what they think the question was. Make sure you're close, right? It's really important. I can't tell you how many grants I get where I literally send it back and say, you didn't answer the question. UTO uses a focus. Address the focus. Like if we use words like evangelism, use those. I highly recommend using the words the board has used. I know these seem simple, but it's like you know your project really well, and you are so in the midst of it that you forget sometimes the simple pieces. Remember that the people who are reading them don't know you and don't know your project. And so you are your best advocate, followed by the bishop. The bishop will write an endorsement form with it, which is really important and is a chance to really tell your story. If you have a UTO coordinator in your diocese, that person, with the help of a committee and the bishop, can write an additional letter endorsing your application. That's really important. Every chance you get to tell your story, tell your story. Answer the question, but tell your story. And remember that we don't know you, and we don't know your story. Don't be embarrassed. One of the things I've noticed in the 5 years that I've done this job is people sometimes get embarrassed about their communities, and they don't want to tell the truth about their communities because you're proud, and I get that. I grew up in Southern Ohio. I understand pride and not wanting people to know how poor you are. I get it. It does not serve you well when applying for grant funding. Tell your truth. There's no shame in being honest about who you are. Don't exploit your suffering, but be honest. There's compelling human need, an innovative ministry to meet that need, but we won't be able to know that if you don't tell us. The other thing I would say is watch your word counts. Pay attention. Remember, every grant you apply for, particularly in the Episcopal Church, is read by volunteers, and there are a lot of them. And so the fewer words you can use to say it, which is a lot coming from the Irish person, the fewer words you can use, the better. Really think through your budget. Think about everything you could possibly need. I don't know how many people will call me up and I'll have them send me their application to look at, and I'll look at their budget and I'll say, okay, this is great, but you forgot. Like, this is a great idea, but you don't have any money to do X. And if you don't do X, this doesn't make a lot of sense. And they're all like, oh yeah, I forgot about X. Invite people into the journey with you. Grants that have partnerships in their communities, even if it's sweat equity or more successful projects in terms of getting funding. We know that lone wolf projects don't work well. The UTO board has members who've been trained in asset-based community development. So the board is well versed in understanding that right now the innovative work the Episcopal Church is being called to do begins with listening to what our communities need instead of telling our communities what they need. And so that shows up in your budget. So let's say you want to do a community garden project. I was just actually looking at a grant from 2017 that was a community garden project. And it was interesting because when I was looking back at it, I was remembering that what was beautiful about this budget is they asked UTO for like 2 or 3 things, but there was like 14 things on the budget because the rest of it, even though it didn't have any money associated with it, came from their community. The goal being that they put in this community garden so that the food pantry would have fresh vegetables. Because people had no access, it was a food desert, there was no access to fresh vegetables for people who needed them, so the church grew them. So tell your story in your budget too. Show how people are involved and showing up. And ask for help. There's no shame in not knowing how to write a grant. It's hard, it's daunting, and we will help you. Because that's what I'm here for. All right, so with that, I think I have actually gone through all of my checklist. So I'm going to open it up for questions. Do you all have questions about grants, about UTO?
So 2 questions.
Sure.
Should the money be spent in 1 year since receiving the grant? And second, can we, the second year, ask for more?
Great question. And I should have said that. UTO grants are for 1 year. You have 1 year from the date you get the check. You can apply for an extension if you can't get your project done. That's particularly important. Our funds get released after executive council approval, which is usually the first week of June. So if you're doing there's a great project in the Diocese of Central Gulf Coast that we did a couple years ago for a kayaking program that took inner city kids out, put them on kayaks. Clearly when we paid them in the middle of June, there was no way they were doing that year. So they got an extension, so they had more time to actually do the work. Sometimes it's about things like that, and sometimes you just run into problems. So we do have an extension process that you can have an additional year. We will fund vehicles. We will not extend. If you ask for a vehicle, we will not, you have to do that in a year, because if you can't figure out how to buy a car in a year, another year is not going to help you. So that one we do not do an extension for. So you have 1 calendar year to spend the money and account for it. Oh, sorry, and can you renew a second year? We will not fund the same project or program 2 years in a row. And that's simply to allow other people a chance to be funded. How UTO works is you will apply through your diocese. Your diocesan bishop and hopefully a screening committee will select which application to put forward. Every diocese can submit 2 applications, one for themselves and one for a partner. You can partner with anyone in the Anglican Communion or any of our aided dioceses, which is Province 9 of the Episcopal Church, the Virgin Islands, Haiti, Navajo Land, and the Dakotas, North and South Dakota. So you can, and Alaska. Bishop Lateem hopefully is not listening to the live stream when I forgot him. You can apply for them as well. If you're doing projects with those companions and partners, your diocese can submit 2. And your diocese can submit 1 young adult and 1 seminarian grant. So your diocese could get 4 UTO grants in a year.
But, so before you even apply for the grant, you're applying to your diocese to be one
Yep.
of the, so if 50 churches have projects, only 1 or 2 of them are gonna.
Yes, typically that does not happen. I mean, that would be a lovely problem to have in the Episcopal Church, that there were 50 innovative projects happening in a diocese, and maybe there is a diocese, I don't know. Usually it's 2 or 3. Some dioceses, every diocese is different. So I also say to people with UTO, you need to call your bishop's office and ask exactly how they want to do UTO. Some dioceses rotate it by region or deanery to make it to make the pool smaller, so there's less competition, so you're only competing in that first round with your deanery. Some bishops have mission priorities within the diocese, and so those have first grabs at UTO funding. Some bishops have a project in mind already that they want to apply for, and that's who gets to apply. It's different in every diocese. So yes, you will still want to talk to me when you're applying through your diocese, because I will help you. It's the same application. It's just they will then put the bishop's endorsement with it and send it off to me. And I can help you sort of navigate once you tell me what I don't know every diocese, every process in every diocese. There are too many of them. But I can sometimes help you kind of navigate those realities and see how to help you get through and what that is. But yes, so first you go through your diocese, and then it comes to the UTO board.
And then another question has to do with, so you said you wrote a check in June. So does the deadline is March 1st, and then you make decisions right away and issue the funds
Yep.
in June. So then it's June to June.
Correct, yeah. The only year that's different is this year. It's a general convention year, and historically what happened was they'd collect the funds for 3 years and then announce them all at general convention and hand out the money at general convention. And they stopped doing that in the 70s and went to an annual process. But in the general convention year, in the honor of history, because we are Episcopalians, we announced the grants in the general convention year at general convention. So people who applied this year will find out at general convention, and their funds will be issued by August 1st, and then they have until August 1st next year. Okay. So this is the 1 year it's wonky. We screw up the calendar 1 year for general convention. We go back to my type A calendaring.
So I live in a small university town.
Mm-hmm.
We have college kids. Tell me just a little bit how the young adults.
Yeah, sure. So in the fall, we do grants for young adults and seminarians. These were started 3 years ago by the UTO board in the hopes of getting younger people aware of UTO and to help younger people. Our current board president was a college professor and dean, and is really did youth ministry. She's amazing, and is really intent on helping young adults find their their voice in the church. We have our internship because of that as well. In the history of our sending missionaries, we now have interns. But the young adult grants are changing this year, so I can't give you exact details because it's currently sitting at Executive Council waiting to be approved. But they're smaller pots of money, but looser criteria, in the hopes that these smaller pots of money will be used to do all sorts of interesting things. We've had really interesting young adult grants. We've had everything from, we helped sponsor a conference for the Union of Black Episcopalians Young Adults group, to do some discernment work with them and some mentoring work. We have funded, we just did a lot on racial reconciliation, a racial reconciliation conference through the University of Virginia and the Charis community with Grace Aaron, who's a fantastic young leader in the Episcopal Church. I know some of you are from North Carolina, your food truck that you all did, we outfitted the chapel for the food truck. The young adults come up with crazy ideas, and they're fantastic. We did one with the Diocese of LA that I really love, which is called Journey Together at the Abundant Table, JT at the AT, which was to teach kids about how to grow food and cook food that's fresh and healthy. But the young adult ones are all over the board, and the seminary ones as well. They're everything from we put in Godly Play at Seminary of the Southwest and General Seminary. To a General Seminary student did this really interesting project helping refugees do poetry and art to tell their stories, and had hosted community events in New York to connect people with refugees. So they really are, the young adult and seminary ones, if you want to see what people are dreaming about, reading those young adult and seminary grants are really a lot of fun, because they have big, exciting dreams and really lovely things.
So if I had the idea of starting a youth ministry.
That is not, yeah. So that's the other thing. Young adult grants have to be written by someone who is a young adult. They cannot be, this was very important to the board. Young adult, oftentimes in the church, young adult and youth ministry is like, we do this at you or for you or on you. The idea of the UTO young adult grants is a young adult wants to do something and try something. And recognizing that often in the church, there's lots of money to program young adults, but not a lot of money for young adults to do and act. There's also not a lot of money for seminarians to do and act. I think EES is kind of, in SCOM, I was talking with EES folks. I mean, there's just not a lot of funding for seminarians even to do or try when we're telling them to, like, do and try. And you're broke, so make it work. It's like a Tim Gunn moment.
One of the, I didn't even come to this meeting thinking about young adults, but I'm sorry. I didn't mean that the way it sounded.
No, I get what you mean.
But I mean, when I serve a congregation that has really enthusiastic, really theologically entrepreneurial minded young adults, and they get super involved, and then they graduate from college or they get their graduate degree and they leave. And I'm wondering whether the process and the projects are sort of tailored to be for a transient.
Yeah, they really are, and they come across pretty transient. There are some that are not. There's one in Michigan somewhere that was for like ESL, some ESL support for other college students. The campus ministry group realized that was a need. That has continued because there was a mentoring on both sides of that, so it has fostered. Other ones are one-off. There's a great one. It's a young adult, again, in Michigan, who wanted to do, to collect the stories of young adults' experiences in the church and publish it as a journal, and they did that, and it was a beautiful one-off experience. They wanted to tell their own stories of their experience of being young adults in the church in that place. And then there's others that are more long-ranging. We have a young adult grant to Navajo Land, to Che's Web Development Group, which is a group of young Navajo coders who are building websites and teaching other young Navajo to code and do website design. The United Thank Offering is partnering with them in a bigger project. They're designing a Blue Box smartphone app for us that we will release at General Convention.
Oh, wonderful.
But it's creating jobs for Navajo so they don't have to leave their communities and their families. But it's all run by young adults, and they're teaching each other. Just really beautiful things. So some of them are longer, and some of them are a step in the pond, and then it moves on. And I think all of them are beautiful in their own way. and recognize just the transitory nature of these moments in life, both young adults and seminarians, and the gifts that they bring to the church. So yeah.
Could you repeat the time? It's August
Sure.
1st is when it's
First Friday in August and due the first Friday in November. Those get paid in February. Executive Council meets at the end of February-ish, so they get paid sort of beginning of March. Then the annual grant cycle is released the first Friday of December and is due the first Friday of March from the diocese. Your diocese will tell you when it's due to them, usually mid-February. Yes, so yeah, they will go through your diocese. Any other questions? We're doing really well on time. Yes?
Sure. What's the craziest proposal that has come across your desk, and how did UTO respond, and what kind of surprising results have you seen in terms of the work that UTO has done with things that seem like
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Everybody, so what I will say is every person on the UTO board would probably answer this question differently. So it's hard to say what the board as a whole, and they probably would, if they're watching the live stream, would throw rocks at me for if I tried to say what they would all think. I know there's a board member whose favorite grant was to the Diocese of Iowa to build a piggery in South Africa. And it was like just a couple $1,000s. And actually they sent us this very beautiful picture of a very handsome pig that hopefully will be in the UTO grant brochure that's coming out at General Convention. So we built it, and they were like, the whole time, it's like, the piggery will. It's like all about the piggery, and I think the word piggery was just really like, everyone was like, oh, we built a piggery. There was a grant for I can't even remember where it was, and it's people I know, so that's sort of bad, like people who I've talked to. One of our, we've done several community garden type projects, and one of them was basically for like 2 tons of chicken manure or something. So I found that one entertaining to think about. Personally, I found that entertaining. We are starting to see a lot of grants through the Thistle Farms model, Jasmine Road in Upper South Carolina, Thistle and Bee, Magdalene House in St. Louis, these lovely sister networks, beautiful. The board has visited with Thistle Farms and been there with them, and that's a really lovely an important ministry. In Omaha as well, at the cathedral in Omaha, Nebraska. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the craziest thing I've seen. And I've seen some crazy ideas, and they're all really lovely. And some of them are crazy, like when you think about like the world, right? Like sometimes you're like, that's crazy. And then you think about where it is in the world, and you're like, that's totally necessary. Gosh, that's a tough question. I have my favorites, which some of them I've already told the stories of. I love Bellwether Farms in the Diocese of Ohio, which is a grant we did last year. My children love it because they have a coloring page with Bishop Mark on a tractor. They call him Tractor Bishop, which is a really lovely grant, outside of the box. Oh, I love, one of our young adult grants is it Chapel in the Woods in either Vermont or Rhode Island? It's this really lovely outdoor church. And we funded their chaplaincy, which is really lovely. We built the treehouse at Camp Gravett in Upper South Carolina, which I love. You know what my favorite is? My undergraduate degree, and it's a weird one, my undergraduate degree is in environmental sciences. I worked for Jack Hanna at the Columbus Zoo once, and for the National Park Service, and then I became what you see before you today. I went from one bureaucracy to the other. One of my all-time favorite grants is in the Diocese of Alabama at Camp McDowell is the UTO Recycling Center, right? So you're like, what, UTO Recycling Center? There's no recycling in the entire area around Camp McDowell. We bought them these like recycling machines and built this building to house these recycling machines. Camp McDowell, since the person who just retired as their camp director, has never increased beyond 1 dumpster, even though their camp has like ballooned in size. They have all these buildings that are handicap accessible. They have a handicap accessible pool. They've just like expanded and expanded. They do a folk art camp. They do all sorts of really interesting things at Camp McDowell, but they are committed to environmental education and awareness and do environmental education camps in a place that typically is resistant to environmental education and training. And so when we put in this recycling center at Camp McDowell, it was for the idea to continue to decrease the footprint of waste at the camp, which is, as you all who have ever been to camp, it's a pretty high footprint. And they also now serve as the recycling center for their community. And so they're teaching their community to recycle and to be a part of environmental stewardship and creation care. And I got to be there when they blessed the recycling center, which is like it's like a crazy, crazy thing. And I think that's really lovely. So we did a grant. One of the other grants that I think is a little out of the box and a little strange is we created a mobile science laboratory for the Diocese of Liberia in West Africa, one of our covenant partners. After the war, most of the schools there really struggled to rebuild science education. So someone had an idea as she said, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a science teacher, and they figured it out together with some folks. Some folks even from the UTO board got excited about it and helped them, and they created a mobile science laboratory that they could load into cars and take to the school so that children would have an experience of science. I thought that was really out of the box and kind of crazy thinking. Really, it's interesting. Lots of really interesting things. And it's my work with getting to work with people as they apply is also fun because I get to hear how they got there sometimes, or wrestle with them about why are you expanding because you want to expand, or are you expanding because people need you to? And sometimes it's heartbreaking. I actually told a story in our newsletter. We do a monthly newsletter, which I'd love for you all to sign up for before I jet out of here today, or we can do it online. But there was an application for the Diocese of Fond du Lac. The bishop called me, and we talked about this grant. It was for the cathedral. They have been doing this remodeling project to expand their scope. So they had this whole set of the cathedral that was inaccessible because it was up a steep staircase, and they couldn't use it, and they wanted to put in an elevator. It was a great grant proposal. It would have expanded a literacy program, a food pantry program, a toiletries program, after-school care. All these things would have expanded and bloomed, and it fell below the funding line. The hardest ones for me are the first unfunded, right? The first people who we ran out of money for, because they almost got funded. And when I called the bishop, because I had worked with him on this application, and I really loved it, and I really thought it was really great, and just barely didn't get funded. I called him and I said, can I tell your story about us not funding you? Like, typically I just tell stories of things we fund. So, but can I tell your story that we didn't fund this thing that would have transformed your church and your community? And he's like, please do, and tell them we're still raising money for the elevator. And they're still working on it. They are committed to making that happen. They're committed to transforming their community and their world.
If you get turned down, can you reapply the next year?
Yes, and we will always tell you that. We tell you that, and we say, please tell people to give to UTO because we don't want to tell you no again. That's the worst part, right? And again, I'm glad, because I don't make those decisions. I just have to tell you. Any other questions? And Steve has a grant. I mean, there's some of you sitting here who have grants that have been transformative for you. Do you want to say anything about getting your UTO grant?
We received a grant, was that 3 years ago?
Yeah.
And it took us a while. We redid our kitchen so that it's a certified kitchen, because if you're selling food, you need to have a certified kitchen and a food handler's license. So it's been a combination of things. It's kind of the kitchen of the community. So since our parish hall has, we can get about 140 people in there. Lots of different community groups use it for their fundraisers and other things. And then we're food incubation center, so helping people get up and running, because food businesses, the biggest expense often is the rental of a kitchen, certified kitchen. So for those of you who were here yesterday, we have a chocolatier. That was the first one. So I don't get like voices from above, but when somebody shows up and makes chocolate, you feel like, okay, this is clearly God.
Right, totally God.
We have somebody who makes syrups, and she reclaims food, so she has relationships with different people who sell at farmers markets and also with Whole Foods and other places. So the syrups are all naturally original and reclaimed syrups. We have somebody who's doing sourdough bread and sells it at farmers markets. We
Yeah. Yeah, but I can't. Everyone's an acronym anymore.
Neuro is part of that, and I'm trying to remember the people from Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so she does catering, and often is used then by community groups who want to keep the money cycled into the community. And that's the biggest thing about these food businesses. Not only do they provide revenue for the people doing them, but that money has like a 1.4 multiplier effect. So if it's spent in the community, it has those kinds of impacts versus it being spent outside of the community.
Yeah.
There's kind of two ways that it's really been helpful for our particular location in having viable businesses in the community. And that all came because
Mm-hmm.
the Fiscal Service Corps person, Tori Dahl, with the help of Peg Cooper, who's our local
Yep.
UTO representative.
She's the one that loves the piggery.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So we went through several cycles and finally got it figured out. And so we spent a little more than we got from the UTO grant to upgrade the kitchen. So that's what happened.
Yeah.
How many grants in the normal cycle do you get each year?
Annually, we award around 40 to 50 grants through all.
So then you get 120 applications.
Yeah.
Could you say a little more about, I know you're not part of the decision-making, but about
Yeah.
how I mean, the way you described the cathedral elevator, you said it was
Yeah.
terrible, they fell below the
Yeah.
funding line as if it was pick up sticks and you pick up the first 40, but
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's not how.
That's correct, yeah. So the UTO board reads independently all of the grant. Actually, so first we have a committee. The committee reviews your budget to make sure that your budget is in criteria. This is actually a really important one. If 51% of your budget is eligible for funding, you move forward in the process. If 51% of your budget is not eligible for funding, so let's say, the way I always describe it is, let's say you ask for $100 for food and $20 for plates, like plates you can use over and over again. We can't fund your grant because the only thing in that we can fund are the plates. And what we've learned is if we can't fund you 51% or above, you're less likely to be able to complete your grant project in a year because trying to raise the other 49% is a lot for most people. So that's why it's important that you check with me so I can work with you on your budget.
So you don't fund consumables?
We do not fund consumables of any kind. If it can be given away, if it's to be given away, we don't fund it. If you want a resource library, we'll fund that. If you want to buy books to give to people, we won't fund that, for example. So the grants committee reviews your budget to ensure that it's within criteria. Sometimes they send me back to you if there's, especially with construction projects, because we won't pay permits, but we'll pay construction costs. So sometimes I come back to you for further clarity. Then it goes to the full board. They read it independently all over the Episcopal Church. And they utilize a rubric system based on different rating questions based on the focus and the criteria for that year. They change every year based on those sorts of things, from community involvement to, like this year was racial reconciliation. It was becoming beloved community was the focus. So the rubrics questions asked how did you demonstrate that? And simple things like we provided extra documents to help explain becoming beloved community. Did you reference those? Was it clear you had read them and understood them? Or were you just, because see, that's the other thing too. Please remember with the focus, if you look at the focus and you're like, this has nothing to do with my project, but I think I can make it work, stop. The board will see through it. They will. You will fall below the rating line if you try to shove it in and it is not the focus. Wait until it is your focus. It will come. The focus changes every year. I promise. I always say to people, I promise you, you are better off waiting. So that often is why stuff falls below the funding line, is they were trying to shoehorn a project in because they wanted funding that year and didn't want to wait. And sometimes it's just they simply couldn't articulate clearly how they were doing that focus. Like you could hear the hints of it or the hopes of it, but they didn't articulate it as clearly. And so the board utilizes that rubric to evaluate how fully are you living into that, that focus. So then those rubrics are submitted electronically, independently again from each other. They show up on my computer. We do an average of those. The highest ranked gets paid first, and we just keep paying until we run out of cash. So it is as And I think this is the hard thing. We have tried to make it as unemotional as humanly possible. I mean, obviously we are humans and we are emotional beings and we have feelings, but to try to make it as fair and as just and as scientific and as transparent a process as we possibly can. And then I just throw them down the stairs and I pick up, no, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
So if I'm an existing 501c3 with a program,
Mm-hmm.
and I am interested in extending that into a new population in a new, for example, racial community, is that potentially eligible?
Yeah, so the question's sort of twofold. One is, I'm a 501c3. I see you. Do I have 0 minutes? Oh, can I just answer this one real quick? Yeah, perfect. I thought I had till 10:55. Oh, shoot, I'm sorry. So real quick, so if you're a 501c3, you have to demonstrate that there is oversight and audit capacity by the diocese or the Episcopal Church. That's the first step. The second step is, yes, if you are like, we have been doing, I'm trying to think of a good way to talk about expanding. We have been doing a literacy program for 1st through 5th graders after school at the elementary schools, and we want to now expand into 6th through 8th graders. That would be a new, expansion. If you were like, we have been doing music and we want to add science, that's a new twist on what you're doing. It can't simply be, we want to add more people to this program, like we've been doing 1st through 5th graders and we want to add 50 more 1st graders. That doesn't work. It has to be a new.
What if you've been doing the program on Mondays and you want to do it on Wednesdays and Fridays?
No,
Okay.
unless you're doing something new on Wednesdays and Fridays. All right, well, I will stop now to let you all have a break before Tamara, who you should all stay for because she is fantastic. And we'll talk about the asset map and how important that is to getting people connected. But thank you all so much. If you would like more information about UTO, come stop by. We'll sign you up for the newsletter. And please be in touch. I have cards, too, if anyone wants.